Something else that I think is really interesting, Logan, that has been dominating the discourse really over these last 48 hours is people proclaiming that we're done with the 90s, that 90s basketball sucked, that Michael Jordan didn't have a left hand. I already made a TikTok on this. I fired off some tweets, but I really, although I dislike the intent of the conversation, and I think it's in pretty bad faith, I do think it leads to some interesting stuff. So what's your take on that whole conversation?
I thought you had a great breakdown on TikTok, on Twitter,
Thanks, man.
about the case. I mean, I think the fundamental point that you hit on was that it's a different game, man. It's just a different... The game's just being played differently, man. It's a completely different brand of basketball. The defensive rules back in the day in Jordan's era, the skill level that we've seen. I think that's one big thing is, like, obviously players are better. They're more athletic. They're more skilled. It's just like how life should work. We should be improving and getting better. I don't really know how that's a controversial, like, take. But to me, it's like a big thing that you hit on, the Jesse Owens comparison. How can you expect these guys to be ahead of their time when, like, how can they be? Like, when people discredit Bob Cousy or Jerry West or Bill Russell, it's like, okay, have these guys be born in 1996 and let them watch modern ball with the modern rules and the modern skill, and it's like, those guys, they're humans. They're still elite athletes of their era. Sure, they may not be the caliber of athlete, but you give them modern training, you give them modern skill, they're just not going to be able to hang. Like, Bob Cousy's dribbling a ball like this, man.
Yeah.
Let him carry and get all crafty and nasty with it, man. I bet Bob will break out some nasty stuff. Like, it's just...
Bro was not allowed to hit the hezzy. Bro was not allowed to cross.
It's just a moot point to me. It's a moot argument, man. Like, to just discredit these guys, it's dumb. It's really dumb. If you drop Bill Russell in today's game, I think he can play. I think he's elite. You know what I mean? I think you can drop any of these guys and they're going to be able to play if you give them what we have nowadays. I think it's a really dumb thought exercise to say that these guys were plumbers. Like,
yeah.
The discourse is pretty dumb now. Like, obviously, the game's better now. How could it not be? That's the natural progression.
Right. That's just so obvious to me. That's the case in every single sport. Like, are you kidding me? You compare what we see Patrick Mahomes do to what Johnny Unitas did, and I would say that Mahomes is still better even compared to his peers, and that's how we judge people. But
it's
the
a
gap in raw skill and athleticism,
too.
It's overwhelming. It's a completely different sport, Logan. We see dramatic rule changes, oftentimes that go to favor the offense, generally that begin to favor the offense, and we see, right, like you're talking about, more generosity in terms of ball handling, which allows for more creativity, allows for more ways to create separation, all these things. But fundamentally, dudes just get better at everything over time. We as a human race get better at everything over time. The example that I used in my TikTok is that if today some scientist put together a study and said, guys, I think that we may be revolving around the sun, Earth may be revolving around the sun, you wouldn't exactly get a standing ovation. I don't think they're giving you the Nobel Prize for that one. But when Nicholas Copernicus says it in the 1500s, I mean, that's a legacy moment, bro. That's insane. What a baller. How could he possibly have seen that? They called him a heretic. It was incomprehensible. You work within the context of your time. We are just in a progression of stepping stone to stepping stone to stepping stone. You do not start a sport. You do not start a professional sports league in the 1940s and immediately have a dude like Victor Wembanyama, who's 7'4" and highly skilled and is shooting the basketball from three, which you wouldn't have even thought of to do in playmaking. Like, that doesn't happen. You have step after step after step. You don't get Nikola Jokic before Arvydas Sabonis. And so that's why I am opposed to saying, okay, we just need to shit on these old guys because the sport wasn't in the place that it is in today. Not only is the talent pool deeper than ever before because now it is such a deeply global sport, that is true. But again, it's the other things that we've talked about. We understand nutrition better. We understand medicine better. Guys can play for longer is one thing, but just in terms of maximizing athleticism, maximizing skill, the development, the training strategies are all better. Basketball itself, in terms of strategy, we are so much smarter. That's the other point. It's like, you guys are shitting on 90s basketball, Why don't you watch any basketball before 2015? Go watch a 2012 Thunder game. Like, basketball was still bogged down. There was a lack of spacing. You probably had 2 non-shooting bigs on the floor at all times. Everybody was settling for tough mid-range jumpers. And I'm not saying that basketball in the 90s is the same as it was in 2012, because those are clearly different too. But in terms of skill and strategy and just the optimization of basketball efficiency, they're both way behind what we see today. And now basketball, in terms of skill and athleticism and strategy, is the best that it's ever been across the board. But that's going to happen next generation and the generation after that. And so to me, it's a much more interesting and valuable conversation to acknowledge the greatness of all these generations and appreciate them and what they brought to the sport and how they led to the next thing, and say, in the context of their time, who was the greatest? To not diminish Jesse Owens because his time, right, in 1936 wouldn't qualify for the final Olympic heat in the 2020 Olympics, because that's not surprising, because everybody gets better at everything over time. It's to say, okay, he was this much better than his peers. And the thing that I would urge LeBron stands to think about as they use this in the short term as an argument against Michael Jordan, which, by the way, I have no problem with people who think LeBron is the GOAT. What I have problem with is the way that you go about constructing those arguments, because they are often in bad faith. But you will always be able to make a legitimate argument that LeBron exceeded his peers by more than Michael Jordan exceeded his peers. Do I agree with that argument? I slightly disagree, but you will always have that argument. What you will not be able to say with a straight face in 30 years from now is that LeBron is better than the best dude on the planet, who's going to be 2 inches taller than LeBron, every bit as strong, every bit as fast, but shoots 40% from 3 and 90% from the line. That's the way things are going. And if you don't understand that, what do you think Michael Jordan diehard fans thought? Like, that's just how it goes, man. You get better and you get better. And I think we're much better off appreciating greatness than we are just shitting on it. Like, it's just negative and it's useless. And if you can't see the beauty in that basketball, that's weird to me, because there is still a bunch of beauty to be found. You watch the 91 finals, you don't appreciate Magic Johnson's passing. You don't appreciate MJ's one-of-one body control. Like, you don't enjoy watching that? That's just beyond me.
A lot of the criticisms, too, is like people going, oh, well, because I've seen some of these videos, too. They're not pressing at the three-point line, right? The ball pressure isn't crazy. And it's like, yes, they're not pulling three-pointers, so they're going to lean towards the basket, because that was the emphasis of the game, is to get to the rack. Like, it's all within context. Like, if people...
And basketball is better today. Basketball is so obviously better today. That doesn't mean that basketball sucked in the 90s.
Yeah. And I don't know, it's like if you made this argument against football, again, we're talking about 2 different sports, right? The 1970 Steelers fundamentally changed how football was played because of how they played defense. You know, Mel Blount was going to hit you for 20 to 25 yards up and down the field, and the second that ball was in the air, he was going to lick you. And then the NFL said, lick you. I think we got to put the 5-yard rule in place. You know, you can't have contact beyond 5 yards. Quarterbacks getting obliterated. Like, there's so much more. It's just a different game. It's a different era. And these are still human beings who are, again, in their time, the greatest athletes of their era.
Right.
And if you put them in here, they would be the greatest athletes of this era with modern medicine and It's dumb to me, man. It's really dumb that we discredit them. And I, like you said, dude, I think we should appreciate it more. I think that we should go, this is where we came from. This is how we've grown. And, that guy's coming, man. We already kind of get a glimpse with Wemby.
Right.
What's next?
That's what I'm saying, dude. Every single year, maybe with the exception of this year, but there are prospects where it's just like, wait, that archetype didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah.
A Chet Holmgren didn't exist before Chet Holmgren. And then a Victor Wembanyama emerged.
Yeah, man.
And it's like, cool. So we already have this unicorn on steroids, just way better across the board. That's what happens. And it is so obvious. And what really cracks me up about this whole conversation is that it's like there's this collective revelation among the people who are saying we're done with the 90s, which is hilarious because you can't come to this understanding of, hey, these are the flaws with 90s basketball, or if you want to just outright say, 90s basketball sucked, I disagree, but that's what these people are saying. That happened 30 years ago. which tells me that you obviously have never actually watched 90s basketball if you're coming to this realization now. And yet I am sure that so many of you have been peddling your GOAT argument so passionately for so long. And that's just hilarious to me. Like, that's where we talk about so much of this being in bad faith. You should not be coming to these conversations with your position that you are entrenched in and that you are just going to try to affirm no matter what, because that's how we obviously get confirmation bias, which is 95% of sports discourse. You come into it and you watch these guys and you accrue the evidence, and then you should form your conclusion. I know that that's an impossible standard to hold people to, but we would be so much better off if that's how we did view these things. The one other point that I'm seeing people say is that it's like, well, if you're just judging people versus their contemporaries, then why isn't Wilt the GOAT? Complicated conversation. We've had this talk before. I mean, I had Wilt at number 9 in my all-time players, and the reason for that is that he's not the best player of his own era, because what Bill Russell could do, automatically making you the best defense in the league by a wide margin, was more valuable in that era. And even though Wilt obviously exceeded him in terms of natural ability, he was not able to consistently channel that until like 1967. That's when you're getting Wilt, who understands giving his all defensively, weaponizing the threat he is as a scorer to be an elite playmaker. Before that, you have Wilt where it's like crazy volume scorer, barely passing the ball, which makes him easier to guard, which means he's not having the impact on team offense that you would expect, which means they're, I think, 10 and 35 or something when he gets traded from the Warriors. Like, Wilt, early on especially, his raw numbers exceeded his actual winning impact. And so that's what I say to that argument as well. But I treat 60s basketball players on the same plane as I do these guys, not in terms of ability, but in terms of their greatness, in terms of how they competed versus their peers. The one spot where I do make a delineation is pre-Bill Russell, because the league was effectively segregated. There were so few black players, and then it's just like, all right, that's whack. You know, I'm not going to treat that with the same level of respect. But other than that, man, everything leads to the next thing. It's all awesome. And I do understand that a lot of this is coming from just like a mutual bad faith. And the fact that it's, okay, well, the young people are saying, the old guys suck. But at the same time, the old guys love to say, the young guys suck. And they don't play defense. And none of them could have cut it in the 80s with Larry Bird. That stuff is every bit as bad. And I do want to be clear about that. Like, I don't rock with that, okay? That's whack. It's dumb. It's untrue. Basketball skill is better than it's ever been. And that's how things go. And the last thing I want to say on this is that when I talk about the importance of judging guys versus their peers, judging their greatness within the context of their eras, I saw one guy who was like, you're acting like these two played in different eras, but LeBron and MJ were in the league just 1 year apart. They peaked 25 years apart. The gap in time between MJ's peak and LeBron's peak is legitimately the same as that between MJ's and Wilt's. And the dramatic transformations in basketball that we see over this course of time, from when MJ came into the league in the 80s, and it was actually a very up-tempo, offensively oriented era for the league. Then into the late 90s, early 2000s, when you're looking at peak grittiness, slow basketball, physical basketball, really ugly basketball in terms of offensive production, into what we've seen in the last decade of LeBron's career, when you're talking about 5-out basketball, overall skill higher than we've ever seen, stretch bigs taking over the sport, these unicorns that are now emerging. It's like all of these eras are so distinct. They're so different. It's so obvious. And the one constant is that skill gets better. And you cannot expect anybody to be completely ahead of what was considered possible in their time. And that's why you judge people versus their contemporaries. And LeBron and MJ are from dramatically different basketball landscapes.